Hey guys, my name is Wallo. So I've recently watched the second part of the Dune films and I've gotta say I really enjoyed it. I love the scenery, the cinematography, the acting, and of course the amazing music and sound effects. So I felt really inspired to kind of try to create a little track with the sounds of Dune. And now I want to share with you what I've made and also how I got there. I've only used sounds of the first part of the two new Dune films, so if you haven't watched the second part yet, it doesn't matter. But of course, if you haven't watched any of the new Dune films yet and you kind of want to keep a fresh mind to it, I don't know, I will show some very short snippets of the film, so there won't be any big plot spoilers or anything like that, but just keep that in mind if you want to have like a completely fresh mind for the first part of Dune. But okay, so let's have a look at the track now. Okay, so you've already heard a little bit of the track now. So I've collected 10 different samples to make this track and I'm gonna show you each of them now. By the way, I've got these samples from a behind the scenes video of the sound designers of Dune. I'd highly recommend watching it. It's really interesting. I'll put a link in the video description for that. So the first sample is this singing sand dune sample here. So apparently the desert or the dunes kind of make a very specific sound. I think it has something to do with the wind that's blowing over it. Anyway, it sounds like this. Then I've got this thumper sound, you know, the thing they activate to attract these big ass worms. And they actually, you can see it a little bit here, they actually recorded it with different mics in the sand and then some guy was just hitting the sand on top. Quite interesting. Then I've got the sound of the worm here. This Foley here that represents the sound of the spice. I also sampled the sound of the Mother Reverend when she uses the voice, this magic power, I don't know, that makes people obey them.
You dismissed my mother in her own house.
Come here, kneel.
I sampled some of these weird noises. As well as the helicopter sound. I think they're called ornithopters or something like that in the film. They basically look like giant insects, but they sound really cool. And I also wanted to use the sound of the shields they use. And last but not least, I added this vocal from the Gom Jabbar soundtrack. So I can still remember that when I had left the cinema, I was still hearing this voice in my head. And it had to be in this track. It's very unique and it sounds really cool. So let's have a listen to it. So yeah, these are the 10 samples I've used for this track. And I started by writing the intro and the verse. Let's have a listen to it. Alright, so the verse is quite simple. I've used this sand dune sound to start off the track because it sounds really, I don't know, it sounds kind of dangerous and I thought it would fit nice in the beginning. And then this thumper comes in, which basically lays out the rhythm for the whole track. I just compressed it a little bit. I took out some of the low end because it was quite heavy in the lows here. And this EQ here is for the drop where I want to cut out all of the lows. After this short intro here, I am introducing this brass, which sounds quite epic. I wanted to keep this cinematic feeling. So this brass consists out of 2 layers. The first one is this Abbey Road low string layer. And I've applied some processing to it. So without it, it would sound like this. Quite low in volume and not that aggressive. So I added some EQ changes here. This tape saturation plugin. Even more saturation. And this is very important, the OTT, to just compress it a lot and make it louder. And I've also added this emitter here to control the stereo field a little bit. And this would have been probably enough, but I've also added this serum layer here, just to give it a little bit more of that saturated feeling. Together they sound like this. On the group bus, I mainly added a reverb. Without it, it would sound like this. And I'm automating the gain here before the reverb because the Abbey Road strings have quite a long tail, which you can hear because of the compression. And I wanted to cut that out and let the reverb play instead. I'll show you what I mean. So if I turn off these effects, it would sound like this. You hear this white noise of this layer here. So this is just a part of the sample. So that's why I'm adding this volume automation here. And the reverb is this Raum reverb, which I compressed and cut out the lows. And this overdrive here, I'll activate in the drop to give it some more of that high end. So far, it sounds like this. To add some more texture to that, I added these weird noises. And then I took out a part of the helicopter sample and looped it. So without any effects, it would sound like this. But I then added this EQ and this volume shaper to create like a nice rhythmic element. And then there's this worm sample, which also acts as a rhythmic element. It almost sounds like a ticking clock. And these were basically all the elements of the verse. So now I'm just adding this epic vocal I've shown you before to make everything come together. Without any processing, it sounds like this. So already quite good. I just added some more reverb, as well as this delay, which I'm automating. And I've also added this distorted layer here, which is the same sample, but just very, very distorted. And I'm just slowly increasing the volume of that to kind of emphasize certain parts. And that's our verse. So for the build-up, I really wanted to start, well, building up the energy of the track. Let's have a listen. Okay, so what stays the same is the brass here, the thumper sound, the weird noise, and the helicopter and the worm rhythmic elements. In addition to these elements, I've added some risers and this shield sample. Here I'm just looping a part of that shield and pitching it up to create like another rising effect. For the drums, I've added these African drums here, which I'm slowly filtering in, as well as this snare drum and these ambient, very big kind of stadium claps. I'm emphasizing these claps with some shouts in the back. And I've also added this cinematic transition from the verse to the build-up, which sounds like this. So these are pretty much just very good samples. One is this orchestral impact, and the other one is this swell. For the vocals, I'm slowly filtering in this vocal chop, which I will also be using in the drop later on. And I'll explain the processing on this a little bit later on in the drop. So all the elements together now sound like this. Now let's have a little look at the transition from the build-up to the drop. So the main thing I'm doing here is that I'm cutting out all of the highs here. So I'm adding this high cut automation. And I've got that idea actually from the first part of the Dune films. There's this one scene where the protagonist, Paul, gets kind of zoned out because of the spices, which are kind of drugs. And they've also used this high cut method, I guess, to create this zoned out vibe, or just to cut out everything and create that contrast. So in addition to this effect, I'm adding the vocal. And I'm again adding this shield sample here. And I'm using this ringing tone to kind of create a sweep into the drop. Okay, so here we are in the drop. So the main melody is this vocal chop, which sounds like this. And it consists basically out of 3 layers: the main vocal, this layer, which is just a serum patch, and this vocoder layer. So let's have a look at the main vocal here. So without any effects, it would sound like this. The most important element here is this volume shaper, which is set to 16th notes, and I'm automating the mix of it to create some rhythm in the vocal. And all the other layers are basically following this rhythmic pattern. Then I've just added some OTT and some saturation, as well as this low cut. For the first layer here, this serum patch, I've added this volume shaper again, together with some distortion. And the vocoder is also just following one note. Nothing special going on here. Altogether, it sounds like this. For the drums, I've used this kick here, together with these little cymbal fills. And after 4 bars, there's this little drum fill, which is again just a contact library with some nice sounding drums, which then leads into the second part where the snare starts playing. The snare consists out of 3 layers. The first 2 layers are quite punchy, and the third layer is just some noise. I then compressed them a little bit and added a low cut. After 8 bars, I'm adding even more drums. So we've got this helicopter sample from before just opened up to create this top loop. And then I've even added more top loops like this right here, these rolling heads, and this second top loop. I'm also adding these open head fills every 2 bars. And altogether, the drums sound like this. The bass is of course another element of the drop. It sounds like this. And again, it consists out of 2 layers. The first layer is this patch here. And it's just playing the same note over and over again. I'm just automating the pitch here a little bit to create some more movement. To make it sound nice and big, I added a lot of saturation. I cut out some of the lows to add this sub here, which is doing basically the same thing as the main bass. And on the group channel, I then just glued everything together and added some EQ. I am again using the brass from the intro. And these were basically the main elements of the drop. Together, they sound like this. And now I've just added some little ear candy and some other elements to make it more interesting. So I'm using this thumper again from the intro. I cut out the first big hit to make it fit better into the drop, and I've also cut out the lows. I'm also adding this noise shot every 8 bars to emphasize the first beat of the drop, as well as these reversed cymbals. After the first 4 bars in the drop, I'm filtering in this piano. Just to create some more interesting textures in the background. It's just a classic piano with a lot of reverb on it. As you've maybe already noticed, I'm slowly building up the drums of the drop here in the first part. And in the second part, all the elements of the drums are playing. In between, there's this little transition here.
Come here.
which consists out of this sample of the Reverend Mother.
Come here.
Which sounds kind of spooky on its own, but it fits really nice into this transition here. So all I did here was I cut out a lot of the low end because it was quite low end heavy, and I compressed it to make it louder and added some reverb. Then I reversed the reverb of this sample and added it as a transition effect. And I've also added a delay to the second part of this sample to create this delay effect here. So this is just the last part of this sample here. To make the transition even smoother, I've added this shield effect again.
Come here.
And this shield sweep.
Come here.
Another tiny change I've made to the second part of the drop is that I switched out some of the vocal chop samples here. Just to make it a little bit more interesting compared to the first part of the drop. As the second part of the drop progresses, I'm adding these sweeps again to kind of get to the end of the track, together with these cinematic effects from before. And then I'm just letting the vocal play to finish it off. And that's it for this track, so let's have a listen to the full result now. And that's it again for this video. Thank you as always so much for watching. Let me know whether you've already seen the second part of the Dune films and whether you liked it or not. Be sure to check out my Discord channel in the video description below. I'll be hanging out there sometimes, so if you want to chat with me, this is the perfect place for that. And that's it for now. See you next time. Bye bye.